Penguin Random House Audio presents A Terrible Country by Keith Gessen. Read for you by Ari Fliakos. Part 1. 1. I moved to Moscow. In the late summer of 2008, I moved to Moscow to take care of my grandmother. She was about to turn 90, and I hadn't seen her for nearly a decade. My brother Dima and I were her only family. Her lone daughter, our mother, had died years earlier. Baba Sieva lived alone now in her old Moscow apartment. When I called to tell her I was coming, she sounded very happy to hear it, and also a little confused. My parents and my brother and I left the Soviet Union in 1981. I was 6 and Dima was 16, and that made all the difference. I became an American, whereas Dima remained essentially Russian. As soon as the Soviet Union collapsed, he returned to Moscow to make his fortune. Since then, he had made and lost several fortunes. Where things stood now, I wasn't sure. But one day, he G-chatted me to ask if I could come to Moscow and stay with Baba Sieva while he went to London for an unspecified period of time. Why do you need to go to London? I'll explain when I see you. You want me to drop everything and travel halfway across the world and you can't even tell me why? There was something petulant that came out of me when dealing with my older brother. I hated it and couldn't help myself. Dima said, "If you don't want to come, say so, but I'm not discussing this on G-Chat." "You know," I said, "there's a way to take it off the record. No one will be able to see it." "Don't be an idiot." He meant to say that he was involved with some very serious people who would not so easily be deterred from reading his G-Chats. Maybe that was true, maybe it wasn't. With Dima, the line between those concepts was always shifting. As for me, I wasn't really an idiot, but neither was I not an idiot. I had spent 4 long years of college and then 8 much longer years of grad school studying Russian literature and history, drinking beer, and winning the Grad Student Cup hockey tournament 5 times. Then I had gone out onto the job market for 3 straight years, with 0 results. By the time Dima wrote me, I had exhausted all the available postgraduate fellowships and had signed up to teach online sections in the university's new PMOOC initiative, short for Paid Massive Online Open Course. Although the paid part mostly referred to the students, who really did need to pay, and less to the instructors who were paid very little. It was definitely not enough to continue living, even very frugally, in New York. In short, on the question of whether I was an idiot, there was evidence on both sides. Dima writing me when he did was, on the one hand, providential. On the other hand, Dima had a way of getting people involved in undertakings that were not in their best interests. He had once convinced his now former best friend, Tom, to move to Moscow to open a bakery. Unfortunately, Tom opened his bakery too close to another bakery and was lucky to leave Moscow with just a dislocated shoulder. Anyway, I proceeded cautiously. I said, "Can I stay at your place?" Back in 1999, after the Russian economic collapse, Dima bought the apartment directly across the landing from my grandmother's, so helping her out from there would be easy. "I'm subletting it," said Dima. "But you can stay in our bedroom in Grandma's place. It's pretty clean." "I'm 33 years old," I said, meaning too old to live with my grandmother. "You want to rent your own place? Be my guest, but it'll have to be pretty close to Grandma's." Our grandmother lived in the center of Moscow. The rents there were almost as high as Manhattan's. On my PMOOC salary, I would be able to rent approximately an armchair. "Can I use your car?" "I sold it." "Dude, how long are you leaving for?" "I don't know," said Dima. "And I already left." "Oh," I said. He was already in London. He must have left in a hurry. But I, in turn, was desperate to leave New York. The last of my old classmates from the Slavic department had recently left for a new job in California, and my girlfriend of 6 months, Sarah, had recently dumped me at a Starbucks. "I just don't see where this is going," she had said, meaning, I suppose, our relationship, but suggesting, in fact, my entire life. And she was right. Even the thing that I had once most enjoyed doing, reading and writing about and teaching Russian literature and history, was no longer any fun. I was heading into a future of half-heartedly grading the half-written papers of half-interested students with no end in sight. Whereas Moscow was a special place for me. It was the city where my parents had grown up, where they had met. It was the city where I was born. It was a big, ugly, dangerous city, but also the cradle of Russian civilization. Even when Peter the Great abandoned it for St. Petersburg in 1713, even when Napoleon sacked it in 1812, Moscow remained, as Alexander Herzen put it, the capital of the Russian people. They recognized their ties of blood to Moscow by the pain they felt at losing it. Yes, and I hadn't been there in years. Over the course of a few grad school summers, I had grown tired of its poverty and hopelessness. The aggressive drunks on the subway, the thugs in track suits and leather jackets walking around eyeing everyone, the guy eating from the dumpster next to my grandmother's place every night during the summer I spent there in 2000, periodically yelling, "Fuckers! Bloodsuckers!" then going back to eating. I hadn't been back since. Still, I kept my hands off the keyboard. I needed some kind of concession from Dima, if only for my pride. I said, "Is there some place for me to play hockey?" As my academic career had declined, my hockey playing had ramped up. Even during the summer, I was on the ice 3 days a week. "Are you kidding?" said Dima. "Moscow is a hockey mecca. They're building new rinks all the time. I'll get you into a game as soon as you get here." I took that in. "Oh, and the wireless signal from my place reaches across the landing," Dima said. "Free Wi-Fi." "Okay," I wrote. "Okay?" "Yeah," I said. "Why not?" A few days later, I went to the Russian consulate on the Upper East Side, stood in line for an hour with my application, and got a 1-year visa. Then I wrapped things up in New York. I sublet my room to a rock drummer from Minnesota, returned my books to the library, and fetched my hockey stuff from a locker at the rink. It was all a big hassle and not cheap, but I spent the whole time imagining the different life I would soon be living and the different person I'd become. I pictured myself carrying groceries for my grandmother, taking her on excursions around the city, including to the movies. She'd always loved the movies. Walking with her arm in arm around the old neighborhood and listening to her tales of life under socialism. There was so much about her life that I didn't know, about which I'd never asked. I had been incurious and oblivious. I had believed more in books than I had in people. I pictured myself protesting the Putin regime in the morning, playing hockey in the afternoon, and keeping my grandmother company in the evening. Perhaps there was even some way I might use my grandmother's life as the basis for a journal article. I pictured myself sitting monastically in my room and with my grandmother's stories in hand, adding a whole new dimension to my work. Maybe I could put her testimony in italics and intersperse it throughout my article like, "In Our Time." On my last night in town, my roommates threw me a small party. "To Moscow," they said, raising their cans of beer. "To Moscow," I repeated. "And don't get killed," one of them added. "I won't get killed," I promised. I was excited and drunk. It occurred to me that there was a certain glamour that might attend spending time in an increasingly violent and dictatorial Russia, whose armed forces had just pummeled the small country of Georgia into a humiliating defeat. At 3 a.m, I sent a text message to Sarah. "I'm leaving tomorrow," it said, as if I were heading for a very dangerous place. Sarah did not respond. 3 hours later, I woke up, still drunk, threw the last of my stuff into my huge red suitcase, grabbed my hockey stick, and headed for JFK. I got on my flight and promptly fell asleep. Next thing I knew, I was standing in the passport control line in the grim...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?